Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Overseers. My name's Proilios, and I'm joined as usual by my co host Nightwing. And the Summer Showdown just ended a couple of days ago. We had the Dallas Fuel emerging as winners from the NA region, and the Shanghai Dragons claiming their first tournament title of the season in the APAC region. And not gonna lie, it was a pretty hectic week because we had like I think 20 different matches to watch, and although a lot of them were like fairly close, it got a bit boring for Nightwing and I to watch the same compositions being played over and over again. But that said, it was still a like pretty fun competition to watch, and since we didn't have a lot to talk about, we just thought why not do like a live power rankings for you guys, just to share our thoughts on, um, where we think each of these teams lie after the summer showdown. And this is going to be a bit different for us because we've never made power rankings live before. Usually we both prepare our own power rankings and then just like average them out and present them to you guys. But yeah, this is going to be different. And how do you think it's going to go, Nightwing?
Yeah, I think there's going to be some differences of opinion, but I think we'll have teams in the right ballpark, like probably like two or three spots above or below. So it should be fine.
Oh yeah, and yeah, I think without further ado, we can just begin because I think as we talk about each of these teams, we will be able to share our thoughts on like their journey so far this season and where they stand at the moment. So let's kick things off by the rank 20 team, and Nightwing, I think you and I can probably agree that number 20 is Paris Eternal, right?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair ranking. I think there's not much to be said about this team. They've tried to make some changes here and there, but overall, they're just not able to get it done. From the actual talent of their players to the execution that's sort of drilled into them by the coaching staff, nothing is really working for the Paris Eternal at the moment. And that clearly shows in their whole season's record.
Yeah, I think even despite making so many changes during the season, they haven't really been able to hit their stride. Um, I think it's just a matter of like the lineups not being able to get time to gel well with each other. Because you see a lot of these other teams, they've spent the preseason practicing together, getting familiar with each other's play style, comp structures, and whatnot. And the Paris Eternal have, they've had coaching changes. They've had like probably almost the entire team was like re- removed. So yeah, I think none of these players that are on the roster right now were signed at the beginning of the season. So it's just a brand new team right now. They just hit F5, refreshed the roster, and I don't know for what purpose. But yeah, things are not working out that well for them. I think they are like way below even the team like that we will put above them. I don't know which one that is yet, but I can safely say that they can present themselves as a free win in any match that they play from here on out. Um, and yeah, I think let's talk about the 19th ranked team, Nightwing, and which one do you think might come in here?
I think we have two options here. I think before this summer showdown sort of qualifier season, I would have gone with the Vancouver Titans, but they've recently really stepped up, and they were showing signs of this at the end of the previous tournament cycle as well. But they really came into their own, I think, this particular tournament cycle as well. So I think the Vancouver Titans are out for the 19th spot. I would probably look at the LA Valiant and the New York Excelsior. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think the Vancouver Titans would be here either. I would probably say the NYXL. Although the Valiant are, yeah, they are the weakest team in APAC in my eyes as well. I think they've had some pretty good showings. Like they've had really close games with the likes of the Shanghai Dragons early on in the season. Even the Seoul Dynasty, I think they've played the Spark close as well. They've beaten the Fusion. They've had some good moments, and the team isn't nearly as inconsistent. Like I think you see, for example, like almost all of the DPS players showing like a lot of talent in some place or the other. Dia is just a mechanical god. He was recently able to play the Junker Queen and like to great success. even though the team didn't end up winning a lot of matches. Then they have Easyhan, who has also stepped up on the hit scan a lot. Becky proved to be a pretty competitive Genji and Echo. And yeah, all in all, the lineup is looking like better than expected. Uh, so I would probably put the NYXL below. Like I'm really not a huge fan of Kellen's. I don't think he's looked good on any tank except Winston this season. Um, and even though Yaki does kind of save the team a lot by clutching out fights, it's ultimately just one player playing consistently and clutching out wins. But that's really not enough for me to put them above 19th, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a fair shout. So yeah, I think the NYXL is probably fine at number 19.
All right. What about 18 then? Because Valiant is a team I wouldn't mind putting at 18. How do you think they compare to the Vancouver Titans at the moment, though? Because that's another team I would contest that spot with.
I think the Valiant got a lot of this success a bit earlier in the season. I think the Titans have stepped up a bit later, but I feel like the peaks for the Titans are a little bit higher. Maybe that's just like my own misconception, but I feel like in terms of wait, what?
Oh, we have a guest in here? Can we please evacuate the guest?
Okay.
All right.
Uh,
We are in the wrong Discord
yeah,
channel, guys. Excuse us. We are not in our exclusive channel right now. Uh, yeah. Go
yeah,
on, go on.
yeah. So I think in terms of if you're looking at what chances these teams have towards the end of the year, uh, you know, obviously it's going to be hard for either of these teams to make the playoffs. Uh, but at least the Vancouver Titans are looking a little bit better later into the season, and they're looking more competitive with the more recent meta. So I would say probably the Valiant currently are worse, especially with all the weird things that happened. In the mid season with the Valiant, the weird sort of contract changes and them asking players to pay out of pocket for them signing Marvel, etc. I think the Vancouver Titans are sort of in an upward trajectory, whereas the Valiant are sort of going a bit downward, even though they're nearly at rock bottom. So I would personally go with the Vancouver Titans,
Yeah, that
uh,
is fair.
being
Yeah.
above them. I mean,
Oh yeah, yeah, of course. So yeah, I think the Vancouver Titans were quite good in the summer showdown. I think all in all they were like, even though it wasn't the most consistent set of showings, I think they did establish themselves as a good mid-tier team, which is a lot to be said considering they were like straight up at the bottom. So yeah, I'm okay with putting the Titans over here. So sorry, the Valiant over here.
yeah, and then I think the Titans come next after that.
Yeah,
I
that's
feel.
fair. Yep, yep, yep. I agree. Hmm. Do you want to put
I
like a
think
tier break above Excelsior?
I mean, these teams only have one more win than the Excelsior,
Mm-hmm.
both of them. So, in terms of that, I am not really sure they've quite earned that. Uh, because like if Excelsior wins like one or two more games, then you'll start seeing them as being superior. I don't think that's really fair.
Hmm.
So I think they're roughly in that bad tier of teams. So I think it's fine to not have a tier break.
Works for me. Alright, let's then talk about rank 16. And I think the names that I would throw in here for this are the Boston Uprising and the Washington Justice, I guess. Or, wait, let me think about this. No, nah. I think I would, nope. Think I would put them a bit above yet. What about the Guangzhou Charge?
Yeah, I
Would,
think the contenders that come into my mind would be the Charge, the Boston Uprising, maybe even the Chengdu Hunters, honestly, because they haven't been that great. But I would probably go with either Boston or Charge for this.
hmm So I would probably put the Charge here because I think the Uprising did have some good showings this stage. They early on in the season they naturally had a lot of issues, especially on the tank role, because initially they had Itzal and Marvel and Punk. Then, sorry, they had Itzar and Punk, and then they brought in Marvel, and then Marvel left the team and went to the Valiant and something like that. And then they also have lost their head coach Laurie. So there's a lot of like weird stuff going on with the Uprising. They're not uh, a professional organization, but that said, I think they've had some really good looks in between. Like I think Punk really stepped up on the Junker Queen. Although he hasn't been one of the best Junker Queens, I think like he's not he's competitive enough to win his team fights. Then I think Victoria also had some pretty good showings on the Sojourn. Uh, I also feel like Valentine's Genji was actually one of the highlights of the team in the stage, and like he has, in my eyes, been one of the most consistent players on the team. Even though he hasn't been like a great playmaker in general. Um, I think that kind of puts them above the Charge in my opinion, because the Charge, like, they were pretty bad, kind of similar to the Titans until this stage, where they stepped up thanks to their roster overhaul. But all in all, I don't see them as being super competitive yet. Like they had one good stage, probably because the meta suited them, and yeah, that's about it. And yeah, I think you can just tell me your thoughts on my viewpoints right now.
Yeah, I think Charge going with this sort of ex Chengdu player lineup pretty much has definitely boosted them up the rankings. But before that, they were not doing very well. Uh, Boston have also gotten over some of their problems, especially the drama they had with Striker. But that's also how they picked up some of their wins. So in terms of, I think, how the teams are currently placed, I'm probably more inclined to give the Charge a bit more benefit of the doubt, just because they've been on a bit of an upward trajectory, whereas Boston, I'm not quite convinced. They still have an insanely large roster, and I'm not so sure they're going to be using that roster very correctly still. I mean, they've got three tanks signed, so they should, in theory, be flexible. But it feels like this team is not really making all their pieces work. Um, Either way, I think like you can just take the call, Proelius. I'm okay with either one of these being at 16.
Hmm. Should I throw a couple more names in the mix? I think that
Sure.
might make it a bit easier. One name is the Florida Mayhem, because as of late, I think they have been insanely inconsistent. Like they've like for a team of that caliber, I think it's very weird to be like so inconsistent in general. Because this stage was basically just Hydron carrying them, and like someone landing some good rampages on the Junker Queen. They had a pretty like weak stage two, and even honestly like some pretty abysmal games on like during the Summer Showdown qualifiers. They only really qualified because they had a pretty weak strength of schedule, in my opinion. So that's one team, and the second one, which is like a bit bonkers, is the Philly Fusion, which is because like even though they've had some really high peaks, they have like without doubt being been the most inconsistent team so far this season, because they've gone toe to toe with the Seoul Dynasty on certain occasions, but then they've also lost to the Valiant and the Guangzhou Charge like on multiple occasions. So I feel like even though it's a really hard to place team, it's probably safer to put them in like the bottom half rather than the top half just because of their peak. Your thoughts on this?
I mean, sure, it's fine to put the Free Fusion at the bottom half, but uh, like Chengdu has done significantly worse in terms of making it into these tournament playoffs as well. So when it matters, the Philly Fusion is more clutch than the Chengdu Hunters. So I don't see why you would really put the Philly Fusion there, or why they're worse than Guangzhou, especially, or the Boston Uprising. So I think while yeah, I mean we're not going to put Philly at number one for sure. I think it's still between probably Boston and Guangzhou for this spot.
Hmm. All right. So, all right. So how about this? We do Guangzhou here. We do. Should we do Philly above Guangzhou?
I mean, I think the Boston Uprising are still worse than Philly. At least Philly has made it into like playoffs,
That
and
that's fair.
yeah, I
And
mean they
well,
have more league points than most of the teams, apart from like some that are at the very top. So
mhm.
that's what I think. But yeah, if you want to go with Philly because of their inconsistency and them losing to legitimately bad teams, then yeah, be my guest.
Cause it's like it's a genuinely tough call, right? Like there's no way you can place this team and be satisfied. I think, um, but I think this is all right. Um, how about the Florida Mayhem? Because I think they're somewhere around the caliber of these teams right now.
I think the Florida Mayhem, showed some good promise earlier in the season. Uh, but I feel like, as time went on, they did sort of like just stagnate at a particular point, being a sort of mid-tier team. That said, I think the Chengdu Hunters are worse than them, honestly. Like I think Florida has been clutch here and there. They've understood some compositions well. Uh, this summer showdown qualifiers, like even if they had an easier schedule, they did actually have more wins than Atlanta and Gladiators. So in that sense, I think I'd put Chengdu first, and then maybe Florida after that.
All right, and Chengdu comes somewhere here, does it?
Uh, I guess you
I would
could,
I would
yeah.
probably put them above Boston, and the just the reasoning behind that. Like I feel that the Hunters have they have had like higher quality of play than the Uprising in general. And they've also been more consistent. As in, I think the Hunters are a team that you can safely predict, like how the matches are going to go. You know, like they lose to the right teams and win against the right teams. So in that sense, they have been very like consistent. They haven't outperformed our expectations, of course, but they haven't really, been really bad either. So in that sense, I think they slightly edge out the Uprising, but yeah, it's your call, really.
Yeah, I think this is a fair place for them.
hmm And so the
I think,
Mayhem, yeah, go on, go on.
yeah, I think for the next spot, probably the Mayhem is a good candidate. Below, I think Philly, but above Chengdu.
That's fair, I think.
Yeah,
hmm All right, then, how many have you got? 2019, 18, 17, 16. Okay, number 11.
I
Mm,
think number 11, I would look
Justice?
at the Washington Justice. Yeah,
Yeah. And is there a tier break here, or do we club them?
no, I think it's hard to really call it a tier break because I don't really know who would win between Justice and Philly. Both
hmm
of them are like really impossible to predict.
Yeah.
Sometimes Decay shows up, sometimes Decay is sleeping at home. So I don't really know. It's similar to whether or not MN3 decides to do his aim practice that day, I feel. So in that sense, I think both of these are really inconsistent, and that's why they're sort of in the middle, where sometimes they'll outperform other teams, but otherwise they're just sort of confused most of the time.
Yeah, I think right
So
now Washington is just being made or broken by Decay's performance, really. Because I don't think anyone else on the team is really making plays. Assassin does like a good job at cleaning up fights, but Decay is the one who really has to get the first pick in order for the team to really, get things done during any playtime. So yeah, I
to
do
be
agree.
honest,
hmm
To be honest, I could definitely see the argument for placing Philly over Justice, just because at least Philly has two playmakers in MN3 and Zest at different times, whereas Justice only really has Decay. Everyone else is kind of terrible a lot of the time. To be honest, I don't really love Kalios. I don't really love Krillin or Opener. It's just Decay and sometimes Assassin. Whereas MN3 and Zest are both really solid players. I would say if some of the most legendary players are S tier, then MN3 and Zest probably get come into that like A or A minus tier. So in that sense, I would put the Philly Fusion above Justice. I think.
Okay, we can do that.
Yeah, that's all the Philly copium I have, though. I think the rest of the teams that we have are probably above the Philly Fusion.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, let's talk about rank 10 then. I would probably think of putting the rain. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the Rain initially, especially with the early, tournament cycle performances, did seem more promising, but they really just dropped the ball on this one, and they were as disappointing as the Gladiators, if not more. Uh, so I think, yeah, this is a fair spot, and the tier break also makes sense because this is a team that definitely has that potential and does not just have one or two playmakers. They do have an incredibly solid, stacked entire team, and especially now that they've made even more additions, uh, they are like in a good spot to definitely be competitive in this final countdown cup that's upcoming. So I think this is a fair spot for the Atlanta Rain because from here on you've got some really heavy hitting teams, I think.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like I think the reason the rain dropped off a little bit in this meta was that they had to play the double main support composition, and like Ultraviolet couldn't really make it work. And the only time they really had any good brick play was when Vigilante was brought in, and even he couldn't, carry the team because they had issues with the tank line, with Hawk not being able to play a good Junker Queen. Then Kai wasn't performing as well as he normally does, and like even on the damage roll, Nero and Venom weren't really cutting it. So it's just unfortunate. I think it's a just a tiny spell of inconsistency, and it's gonna just blow over. So yeah, let's go ahead and talk about the team above that. Which among these teams, what do you think?
I
Outlaws
think
or Spitfire, probably.
I think the Spitfire is a good shout, definitely. We could also honestly look at the Hangzhou Spark, considering that they have a similar amount of like
Oh
league
yeah,
points,
the Spark.
and the Spark have been just like slightly better versions of the Philly Fusion. To be honest, they haven't really been extremely top tier. I think Alpha Yi and Shy can definitely make huge plays at times, but the rest of the team is not super like confidence inspiring at times, and especially this season they've let me a little down. I think they came into the year looking a lot more promising than they do, in the mid season and going into the Countdown Cup. So I think either the London Spitfire, which had a slower start but now are kind of picking up some really good pace, or the Hangzhou Spark would fit here.
You know what? I'd actually put the Spark below the Rain if I just think about it, because I think Alfie has been a massive bright spot for the team, and Shai does have his moments here and there, but I don't think the team is like anywhere close to the level that we would expect them to be. Um, they've got Bernard and Gusho, of course, but even those guys haven't been making plays. Irony hasn't been that good of a flex support. Like I expected a lot out of him. Super Rich has been doing okay, I think, in general, uh, but I don't really have enough confidence to say that they can beat the Atlanta Rain in probably like 9 metas out of 10. So
Yeah.
yeah, does this work?
I think, yeah, I think this works. And I think you'd have to put the London Spitfire above the Rain just because, Gator did get absolutely diffed in the Rhine mirror earlier in the year. Uh, Now the London Spitfire are continuing to, just get better and better, even though they're a bit of a ragtag sort of team with not, huge franchise names exactly. uh, but they're making their own personality felt throughout the whole league, and they developed their own play style, which is something we only lauded the Dallas Fuel for in the previous couple of years. But the London Spitfire come here with uh, a roster and staff that nobody really believed in, especially considering how terribly London fared last year. uh, I think this has been a huge turnaround for them, and they've really shown that with the right resources and the right coaching, they can actually make things work. So yeah, good on the London Spitfire. I think this is a good spot for them.
So yeah, I was actually kind of thinking if we should put the Outlaws below them, but above the Rain, because The Spitfire did like have a better summer showdown than them, and I think before that the teams were pretty much neck to neck. Because I feel like the Outlaws just tend to disappoint in the most crucial moments, whereas London tends to step up. Like in terms of quality of play, I don't think we can really pick one or the other. But in terms of consistency and just expectation, I think the London Spitfires slightly edge out. Because honestly, like I was expecting the Outlaws to go up to like the losers finals during the summer showdown, but they just like played so terribly that they they got beaten by the Toronto Defiant, who also had the land buff for sure. But yeah, it was just a disappointing loss from them, honestly. And with the changes being made to the team, with like for example um, the trade with the Soul Dynasty, with which they've gotten creative now, and they've lost Iris, which was I think one of their key players. It's gonna be a bit difficult for me to place them above the London Spitfire. What do you think we should do here?
I think probably I think Houston is a little bit better than Toronto, to be honest, to some degree. So I would probably go something like Rain, Toronto, Houston, and then London, because London did beat out uh, Toronto as well earlier in the season. So I
Like
think
this?
you could almost like consider this a mini tier of these three teams where they're roughly in the same ballpark. Houston has been a little more consistent in the sense of not being spectacular, but they were good in the beginning of the season, and they're still pretty good. Like even now, even if they lost to the Toronto Defiant. So in that sense, I think these three teams are roughly equal, but the London Spitfire has a more like just the gift of recency bias since they're coming up and they will have an advantage in that sense going into the rest of the season.
Yeah, because I was gonna have it like this way, but like because I was wondering if this is the right call because of the land buff. All in all, because the team wasn't that good, until they came into the summer showdown, and then suddenly they've just like massively stepped things up, and they are like going toe to toe with the San Francisco Shock and whatnot. Um, but yeah, we can put them here for now. That's all right.
Yeah,
Um,
because in the earlier half of the season, the issue with the Toronto Defiant was that although was not really getting it done for the entire first half, and every time they subbed him, they would just immediately lose, to be honest. And then Finale would have to step in, play a very serviceable tracer, but it wasn't really enough to clutch out wins against like the league's top teams. So I think this is a decent spot for Toronto. Uh, being above Atlanta is still a privilege in itself, to be honest. Like, Atlanta is a team that should be respected. So, Toronto being above them is definitely still a compliment to the team and shows that they have done good work. Because there have been people that, haven't believed so much in players like Hotba, and the backline is definitely still very, very solid. And that's part of what made the Toronto Defiance successful, especially in this meta. But I think that's not something that's going to carry over for them in more DPS centric metas where there's not so much sustain. It's more about clean execution, and that's where I think the Toronto Defiant falters a bit.
yeah, those are fair points. Yeah, I'm all right with this honestly, because these teams are genuinely pretty close, and yeah, it's hard to really confidently place one of them above the other two. All right, top five now. Top five. Here's where things get hairy. Um, all right, throw out a name for rank five, Nightwing. Let's see what you have.
Okay, so for rank five, I think I would probably go with uh, the LA Gladiators, to be honest, because they really dropped the ball here. I think it's between the Gladiators and the Fuel, even if the Fuel won here. It really depends on what you value more. The fact that the Fuel didn't really show up for the first two tournament cycles, but they are like looking really strong going into this next countdown cup, obviously. So in that sense, if you're trying to place them based off of like how much strength they have now, I would probably put the Gladiators here just because they were like a disappointment this particular stage.
I'm gonna
I
throw
think
one more. Oh,
yeah,
go on, go on.
go, yeah, I think both of the APAC teams are like better than that. The Shock is another possible contender, considering they haven't actually won anything, but they have had an incredible regular season, and they've had only one loss in the regular season. So in that sense, and they haven't lost to any silly teams either. So I think maybe the Gladiators, despite them winning the two championships, or the Fuel. I don't really know.
Here's the thing, right? And this might come as a shocker. But I was thinking that the Dallas Fuel would be in the top two somewhere. And I'll tell you the reason for that, right? The way I see things, the Dallas Fuel was still quite competitive early on in the season. Because if you remember, they had like 2 or 3 map 5 games with like with the Gladiators and the San Francisco Shock. They were pretty much in contention. But then they were just being outplayed by teams that could play the Doomfist because Fearless was like pretty bad at Doomfist, and his monkey comps were being countered by Doom, and that's the end of the story for the team. But then when they were up in mirrors, monkey mirrors and whatnot, they were just outplaying everyone else. Then came the Zarya comps, which Hanban was just absolutely fantastic at. He was amazing at Sigma as well. The team did have its lows when it came to double sniper because Gorio was just non-existent on the left side of the kill feed, and they were playing like Gorio Edison or Gorio Doha, and just things just didn't work out well for them, and that was a bit of a slump. But now again they've just risen to the top and they've won like the summer showdown with the newest hero, obviously, in a comp that requires a lot of teamwork. And naturally, it's the most recent tournament, so there's recency bias in there. And were they were undefeated this whole tournament. Like it's crazy. They didn't lose a single match in the qualifiers. They didn't lose a single match in the playoffs, and they barely dropped maps even. So that's absolutely crazy. And I think like if you're just talking about the pure trajectory of this team and the fact that they've now got Junker Queen, like Hanbin is undoubtedly the best Junker Queen in the league right now. And considering that this hero is now just going to be part of the lineup and Jotes is always going to be an option, yeah, I was pretty sold that the Dallas Fuel are probably in rank 1. I would probably put the Shock up at a close rank 2, but like a really close rank 2, honestly, just because of how consistent and formidable the team is in general. But yeah, that was my take on it. And
I
as
think
for
that's
yeah, go on.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Uh, we could honestly, if you just go by the amount of league points and how much they've like actually earned in that sense, uh, then yeah, you could either look at the Gladiators or even like the Soul Dynasty almost. Uh, if you want to like look at someone for fifth place.
Yeah, I'm okay with either of those teams. I think on any given day, either one could beat the other. Which one do you
Yeah.
think? You thought the Gladiators were in fifth, right?
I think at least the Gladiators have won two tournaments, so
Hmm.
that's got to count for something, right? I mean, that just goes to show that they were like twice they were the best team in like the region for the particular metas. So I think it's more fair to put the Soul Dynasty below them, uh, just because the Gladiators did actually get those wins, which many other teams haven't. And I think considering the Shock hasn't won anything, you should probably put them next. Or I would even accept putting Shock above, like right above Soul and below the Gladiators, just because they haven't actually won anything, and all they did was have a good regular season and get to like a few finals.
Hmm. Yeah, I think this placement is perfect here for these two teams, like you suggested. Um, how do you feel about putting Shock at second or third though? Because
I mean,
they have been
yeah, go on.
they have been in like the first tournament they were pretty competitive. They didn't make the finals, but they did like reach I think they were like one match away from the finals or something like that. Um, and they still were undefeated in the regular season. Then in the mid-season madness tournament, they made the finals. They lost very narrowly to the Gladiators. Then again, in the mid-season madness, they were undefeated during the regular season. In the summer showdown, they had one loss, which was to the best team in the meta, which was still undefeated when they won the tournament, and they still made the finals even at that point. So just for the consistency, like potential of the team, I think they should probably be above the Gladiators in the dynasty.
Yeah, I feel like the Shock definitely like have been really consistent, and that's great. The thing I just don't love is the fact that because they haven't really won any like tournament final,
Mm-hmm.
that that means they weren't ever the best team at a particular meta,
Mm-hmm.
which just does not inspire a lot of confidence in me for putting them like even at second place. At
Okay.
least Shanghai has like actually won something, and the Gladiators have also won something. I mean, you know me, I'm like a huge shock fan, but
Mm-hmm.
the fact that like they haven't actually clutched it out in the end, uh, and the fact that they keep continuing that whole control loss streak over and over again. I don't know what that's about, but every time they play control as the first map, they just lose straight up. Uh, so I think I'm a little bit iffy on it, but I think second or third place are both great places for the Shock.
So in that case, you're okay with putting the Dragons at number two, I guess.
Yeah, I guess we can run it back to 2021 power rankings, uh, and just have the Dallas Fuel and Shanghai Dragons on top.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like I remember the rivalry between these two teams during the first two tournaments last year. That was really intense and really fun to watch because the meta was so diverse. And I guess we can talk about this in a bit, but like yeah, I think we'll just address it after we end this. But um, any final thoughts on these top teams, Nightwing, and a tier
Yeah,
break, of course.
I don't know if I love the tier break. I think
Oh, I
on
hadn't thought
any
about it.
given
It was
day,
just there. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, any given day, any given match, any given meta, one of these teams can definitely trump the other. So I think they're roughly in the same ballpark, and they are like all elite teams. I think the Soul Dynasty is lagging a little bit behind. I feel like Smurf is not really cutting it at times. I feel like the support line is not really cutting it at times for the Soul Dynasty. They had to resort to Prophet playing the Brig as well. So there's a few things I'm a little bit iffy on, but overall, like all of these teams are incredibly elite, and they should be proud of whatever they've like accomplished so far in the season. And I think it's going to be incredibly competitive, uh, no matter what meta comes up for this last tournament, and then the playoffs to come after that.
Yeah, definitely. It's like I think it's just a delight to see how competitive this season has been in general, and actually with a lot of teams still figuring out the game, and of course having a new patch in every like between every tournament, just to increase the variety, right? Although that's not what really happened in this latest one, but one can hope, I guess. The devs did say that they were going to be pushing through some Junker Queen nerfs, so that should help the meta out. I honestly think that she needs to be like nerfed to a point where like her healing on the shift needs to go down by like 20-25%, and I think that'll be honestly good enough to like get her down quite a bit because the speed boost that her team gets from it is honestly enough of a buff, and then they get that huge overheal. Either that or then they need to like cut down her damage or then increase the knife cooldown. So yeah, but by a lot. Like they need to like nerf either multiple aspects of her a little bit or nerf like a singular aspect of her like a fair bit so that she becomes a bit more about the cooldowns or the resources that remain with her. Um, but yeah,
I think they could
yeah.
possibly. they could possibly just reduce the sources from which she can get the bleed passive. That way, it's not every ability is contributing to that constant regen for her. Because that does help Junker Queen stay in the fight, especially when supports are taken out, and that means that she can keep the fight going. You saw that whenever a team's Junker Queen would die, the other team would immediately win. To be honest, uh, I mean, that is sort of the case with a tank dying at all in Overwatch 2, since you don't have any core tanks to, still hold the ground. But especially with Junker Queen, once, all those different passives for different types of healing, self healing, and the commander's shout as well, once they're sort of taken out of the equation, uh, the other team just has an overwhelming advantage since there's a lot more passive heals coming in. Not to mention the all like pre-existing passive heals coming in already from the Lucio and the Brig. So I think the devs will be able to figure it out. Uh, and if not, they can just nerf her damage to the ground and just go with that if they really want a better viewing experience for the Overwatch League. Uh, but either way, I think the next patch should be a little bit different compared to what we constantly saw in this meta.
Yeah, I think probably like along the lines of what you're saying here, Nightwing. If like they need to figure out what they want kind of a USP to be, right? Her unique selling point. Um, they need to like think about whether they want the bleed to be her primary source of tankiness. Because look, ultimately she's a tank. She either has to be able to protect her team from damage or create space. I think giving her like the bleed slash life steal. It's not exactly life steal. It's just a damage over time and a heal. Um, but yeah, giving her that kind of life stealy thing in general is a good way to make sure that she can go aggressive a little bit more often and divert attention so that her team can, take the angles they need or push forward. So that's like a making her more like a main tank. Uh, and the only way she can really protect her team that way is from her shout. But I think that if they want to give her that shout, although I like the idea of giving the team over health, they either need to nerf the speed or they need to nerf the healing that it does. Because I do think it's a cool idea that you make your team a bit tankier, like help them survive a bit by giving them over health. But it needs to like either like whittle down much faster, or it needs to like the base amount itself needs to be much lower. So yeah, just those are my closing thoughts, I guess, on the Junker Queen. But in general, yeah, these are our current power rankings post Summer Showdown um, for the season. Naturally, this will change as the games proceed. So we do have a 1 week break for the league. Hope all the teams can get enough time and recuperate. And I hope we get a better patch because, like, Nightwing and I have been kind of thinking that, like, Overwatch 2 isn't as hype to view anymore as Overwatch 1 was, even during its, like, any season that you talk about, honestly. Do you want to, like, just share a bit more on that, Nightwing?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely once the tank is taken out of the equation, like I said earlier, then the fight is very predictable and there's not much any hitscan can or any other sort of DPS can do or any support player can do to really make a difference. Uh, and obviously that was also the case in Overwatch 1. However, at least you could have a tank to contest the point and just be a little bit more of a nuisance. Here, I think you have to see every squishy player just immediately retreat, and I think that takes away some of the climactic nature of the sort of fights where you would in Overwatch 1 you'd see everyone would basically try to get a team kill every time, things like that. That just encourages more plays that are not as based off of some boring things such as respawn times and grouping together, and it's more about making harder plays, alongside the fact that you could actually see a lot more team play with six people coordinating instead of five. Here you can see that because there's more survivability given to almost everyone, especially the supports that used to be a little more just vulnerable, such as Ana. They've now got a self heal for themselves. So they're kind of sitting in their own stations, and there's not a lot of glass cannon sort of action happening where you either get value or you stay safe. Here, you're pretty much doing both things at the same time, and that does tend to get a bit boring. Uh, However, that said, I think Overwatch 2 also brings with it uh, the opportunity to have a much better experience when you're actually playing the game yourself, because you're not reliant on teammates that are incompetent at times. So I think there's definitely a trade-off to be made there with watching versus playing. And I think, I'm not really one to be able to judge that delicate balance, but it does feel a little bit lackluster when you're watching the Overwatch League, and it doesn't quite have the same impact that it used to, I feel.
Yeah, it's like what I've noticed is that like even though there's a very positive point that you get to see a lot more multi kills by players just because there's one less tank to absorb damage. This does mean that there are less opportunities for plays in general. Because, yeah, you look at multi kills, but multi kills aren't the only types of plays that are involved, right? A play can involve something defensive like peeling effectively for a teammate, or, using the right cooldown at the right time, or blocking the right damage at the right time, playing at the right angle at the right time. A lot of these aspects have been nerfed because a lot more weightage is just given to, like, let's see who lands the shot first. You know, that's although that's exciting, like as a player, like okay, I'm gonna line up a headshot and there's not gonna be two shields in front of me. Sure, that's exciting, but it's it's more like it feels more one-dimensional, I guess, to view, because it seems like there are like a tenth of the win conditions that used to exist in Overwatch 1, with just one player gone. Because there are like you look at it as just one player, but think of it as five less cooldowns in a fight, or honestly 10 less cooldowns in a fight because there are two players missing, right? Um, and those 10 cooldowns, like any of them could be used to make a game-changing play, and that's what like it's making us lose out on the variety of playmaking. Every fight, like literally during the summer showdown, what did we see? We literally just saw Sojourns using the railgun and getting picks. Or we saw a Genji using a blade and like killing five. I'm just kidding, that never happened because Naked Blade doesn't do anything. But or we saw Junker Queen landing like a huge rampage. When did we ever see plays from main supports that like wowed us? Like at least consistently, you would see maybe one in an entire week of play across like 15 games. And that's not exciting to me. Like, imagine you're a main support player and you're watching that stuff. Like, there's not that much scope to do stuff. In Overwatch One, there you could build up your ults faster. You could like use them to like make more massive plays. Let's say even you're playing Brigitte, for example. You have that stun. You use that stun to cancel cooldowns, to cancel ultimates, to beat flankers. Right now, Brigitte doesn't even have that stun. She just has a shield bash that boops someone a little bit. Just odd things like these that are like making the viewing experience a little bit more shoddy. But the playing experience, honestly, like once the game comes out, we'll see how it is. So far, the betas have been fun, but although I think they were fun just because we are getting a break from the kind of stale format of Overwatch One. Um, so yeah, those are our thoughts overall. Because just thought we'd put it out there. Because like even though the league is still quite fun to watch, we just felt that way, and like because like in the past 2 or 3 years, and sorry for taking up so much time, Nightwing, but like for the past 2 or 3 years, right? Even if there were some matches late at night, I would just like wake up and watch them, knowing that I would have like something to do the next morning. I would have somewhere to be. But now for Overwatch 2, I don't feel that hyped. I would just rather watch the highlights that come out in case the matches are too late at night. Like even if it's the semis or the finals, because it feels like I'm watching the same plays being made in every game, and that's not that exciting to me. Like it's still fun, but it's not like as exciting to view live. Like I can watch the highlights and basically get the summary of the entire game. There's not much to analyze. There's not as much to be excited about. But all in all, it's still a fun game. It's a new game, and we hope that the devs can like keep introducing more and more variety in maps, game modes, heroes, all of it, and balance the game such that the like every hero is viable, and we don't have to spend like entire patches just fixated on a single hero as soon as they released. So that was my rant, and thanks for listening, Nightwing as well. Took up a lot of time there.
Yeah, I think all good points, and hope we can get the Countdown Cup running soon enough, and we'll see what kind of meta crops up.
Yep, and yeah, I think that's it for the episode, guys. Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you next week where we'll do a few match predictions and see if any roster moves happen this week as well. So, bye bye. Have a nice week.